Hi, everybody, and welcome along to a very special webinar. My name is Eoin. I'm the founder and CEO of Tines, and today I'm going to be taking you on a deep dive of our 2023 Voice of the SOC report. Now, before we get too far into this, a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn and you have any questions as we move through the presentation, please feel free to pop them into the comments box below this video and we'll answer them towards the end of the session. If you're watching this on demand and you'd like more info or you have a question that we haven't addressed, send us along an email either through the website or at hello@tines.com. This year's report is, as always, available for free, ungated, to view and download on our website, specifically at tines.com/SOC. Okay. So every year, as we prepare the Voice of the SOC report, and we're examining the data, a theme tends to naturally emerge. The overarching theme of the 2023 report is that security teams are starting to become restless. The report points out why this is happening and also makes some recommendations for how security leaders, business executives, and so on can keep top talent from leaving or churning and going to a different company. So today, here's what we'll be talking about. First, I'm going to provide a little bit of color on why we do this report every year, what we're hoping to achieve by talking to so many security analysts, and our motivation for making this content freely available and accessible to as many people as possible. Then we'll have a quick glance back at some of the key findings from the 2022 Voice of the SOC report, and we'll examine the key trends and findings from this year's report. Then we'll deep dive into the reasons that security teams are becoming restless. And finally, we'll provide some recommendations for how security leaders can retain their precious security talent. Okay, so we started Tines about 5 years ago. My background is as a cybersecurity practitioner. So before founding Tines, I spent about 15 years working in primarily technical security roles like incident response, security operations, application security, security engineering, and so on. We care deeply about security teams and the people on them. One of the reasons we founded Tines is we often felt that the tools available to security teams just frankly were not good enough. And it made the work of these security teams increasingly more difficult, especially the work of security analysts. But we're very conscious that it's been several years since we were in the trenches of working in an enterprise security team. So we wanted fresh, objective data on the lives of security teams today. So we said, why don't we talk to as many members of SOC teams as possible? And so last year, for the 2022 version of this report, we surveyed about 500 security analysts, primarily in North America. And our objective in doing this was to uncover insights that, selfishly we could use to perfect our own product, but that we could also use to produce original unbiased research that we could then share with the security community, whether you're an analyst, a mid-level manager, or a security executive, that would help you get the most out of your security team, ultimately making the lives of security teams better, ensuring that they're focused on the most impactful work, etc., etc. That was last year. This year, we've gone even bigger. We've gone even bolder. And so before we get into this year's report, it might be helpful to have a quick look at the top takeaways from last year's report. Okay. And so there was a number of insights that we gleaned out of the conversations that we had with those 500 SOC analysts last year. These insights were eye-watering, they were grim reading for many of us, but also they gave a lot of encouragement that if we made if we made some tweaks, if we focused on the right things, that security teams could do their best work, that they could play a critical role in the businesses that they were tasked with protecting. And so here on this slide, we have the top five findings from last year's report. The first finding was that we found that 71% of security analysts experience some level of burnout. Now, that is an extremely, extremely eye-watering statistic. And we'll talk a little bit more about it as we move into the 2023 report. The second finding is that that security analysts were most frustrated with the time that they spent on reporting and monitoring. The third finding was that 64% spent half their time on tedious manual work. The fourth finding was that 66% believed that over half the tasks that they were doing on their day-to-day work could be automated. And then finally, the fifth finding was that 64% of the analysts we spoke to were likely to switch jobs within the next year, the next 12 months. Okay, so let's hop back into our time machines and come back to the present and into the 2023 report. So I had mentioned that this year we went broader. Last year's report, we spoke to about 500 analysts. What's changed in Tynes in that time is that our company has grown. The amount of customers that we work with has grown significantly. We now have customers all across the world, and we wanted our research and we wanted our report to be representative of that. And so this year, we expanded the locations of the analysts that we spoke to into Europe, the UK, the Nordics, to give us a more global view of what was happening outside of just the North American responses that we collected last year. And so what's great is that this year we've almost doubled the amount of people that we spoke to. So this year we spoke to 900 security analysts. And through the rest of this report and the rest of this presentation, we'll see how they're doing and what they had to say. So just like the 2022 report, let's start by looking at the 5 key findings that we can take out of the 2023 report. So the first is that 63% of respondents experience some level of burnout. Now, interestingly, that's actually reduced from last year, but it's not all roses. It's only reduced a small amount. And frankly, it's still way higher than most departments in an organization. So there's some really interesting research from Salesforce and from Microsoft that typically reports burnout across different industries as somewhere being between 40% and 50%, but in security, it's at 63%. The second key finding is that we found that 55% of respondents are likely to switch jobs in the next year, in the next 12 months. So over half of the people that we spoke to plan on leaving their job in the next 12 months. The third finding is that manual work is the single most frustrating part of security analysts and folks that work in SOCs, their jobs. 93% of respondents see hope in automation, with 9 out of 10 respondents performing some sort of automation today. That's really, really great to see. And then finally, learning to code is becoming a much higher priority for the individuals that we spoke to. And we'll talk a little bit more about why we think that's not necessarily a great thing. So we talked a little bit about the things that have changed in the 2022 to 2023 reports. Let's pat ourselves on the back a little bit here and talk about one of the things that hasn't changed. So I think most importantly, something that stayed the same between 2022 and 2023 is that security analysts love their jobs. They feel respected, they're appreciated, and they are fully engaged in their work. What an amazing, amazing thing to be able to say. And we should be really, really proud of that fact. What isn't so great necessarily, though, is that again, 63% of the folks that we spoke to have felt some level of burnout, and 81% agree that their workload has increased year over year. But again, let's not lose sight of some of the real positivity between 2022 and 2023. 99% of the folks that we spoke to, 99%, the vast, 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 vast majority, not only love their jobs, but they also feel respected by peers outside the SOC, by folks that work in engineering, IT, infrastructure, HR, recruiting, you name it. They feel respected by those peer teams. One thing that is not pictured on this slide, which I think is worth calling out, is that 50% of the folks that we spoke to feel that their SOC is understaffed. So half of the people that we spoke to feel that their SOC is understaffed. And so within those teams that feel understaffed, 4 out of 5 say that they're burnt out as well. So not great in terms of like burnout and so on. So what does this burnout mean, and how is it impacted, and how does it manifest? Well, one thing that we're seeing is that this burnout is continuing to impact the SOC organization and its ability to retain staff. So although the number is slightly lower than last year, and we'll get into the why of that in a minute, first, let's spend a few minutes looking at what's causing this burnout, what's causing this frustration, and what is preventing security analysts, you and your peers, from doing their best work and being extraordinarily satisfied. So the top 5 frustrations for security teams. Number 1, 53% of security teams are frustrated by the time that they're spending on manual repetitive work. Now, as someone who spent most of their career working, building, running security operations centers, this is of absolutely no surprise to me. Phishing emails, EDR alerts, SIM alerts, employee onboarding and offboarding, geovelocity logins, suspicious activity. All these are repeatable manual processes that the SOC have to run through in order to rule out false positives and in order to ensure that the organizations they're charged with protecting are not being exposed to unnecessary risks. 49% of security teams say that they're frustrated by the number of systems that they have to rely on to investigate incidents. Again, not terribly surprising. The average number of systems that a security team has access to is today 77. At times, we've got many customers with 150, 200 systems. So it's not surprising that security teams are feeling frustrated by having to know, having to access, having to hop between all these sundry of tools. 47% of security teams are frustrated by expensive security and log management software. So think SIM, think data warehouses. Again, not terribly surprising, but interesting that it's such a frustration, not just for security leaders, but also security analysts who would you would imagine be somewhat protected by budget considerations and so on, but really, really interesting to see. The fourth most significant frustration among security teams is that there is no unified query language across systems. And this, on the face of it, seems like a really, really niche concern, right? However, it's fascinating when you think about it in the context of those repetitive manual tasks with which security teams have to perform. So for example, if you have to know one query language for your SIM, and then you have to know another query language for your case management system, and another query language for your employee system, and so on and so forth, you can imagine how easy it is to be frustrated by just the toil and overhead that creates. And then the fifth most significant frustration for security teams is the poor integration and interconnectivity between security tools. And again, not terribly surprising, right? Again, the number of security tools that a security team has access to, the necessity to embrace a best in breed solution to respond to security alerts, that's all going to lead to kind of broken integrations, lack of integrations full stop, and ultimately toil, manual user interface work, etc., etc. So again, these are the top 5 frustrations that security teams are feeling today. Let's talk a little bit about automation. So we obviously spend a huge amount of time talking to customers about security automation. We spend a huge amount of time thinking about how automation can be best applied to mission critical workflows and processes like security. The really, really good news is that security teams are beginning to embrace automation as a way to address those frustrations that we just saw. So again, if we go back to these frustrations, you can kind of quickly imagine how automation could be applied to absolutely every single one of these frustrations. So again, the good news is that security teams are embracing automation, but we still have a long way to go. And obviously, we can't be a workflow company without talking about automation. So as security teams, how do your peers think about automation? So we can see a drop in burnout and a drop in wanting to switch jobs year over year, right? And so part of that, we believe, is because automation is beginning to be applied more aggressively to tackle those frustrations. So today, 92% of security teams are applying automation to some parts of their job. Where we're seeing that applied most aggressively is in areas like incident response, phishing automation, SIM alerts, employee onboarding and offboarding, etc., etc. 75% of security teams that we spoke to say that more than a quarter of their work could be automated. That is hugely encouraging. If we can automate away the muck work and the most repetitive, error-prone work of these security teams, we think we can have a dramatic impact on the work-life balance of these teams, but also the effectiveness, the ability for these teams to work at their highest possible capacity. And then 93% believe that automation, again, could improve their work-life balance. Hugely, hugely encouraging. And also, anecdotally, this is reflected by how we see our customers begin to embrace automation and the impact that it has. So we see when customers begin to roll out automation, their retention of critical staff improves, the engagement of their teams improves over time, etc., etc. However, one absolutely critical thing that we need to talk about, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, is that over half of the folks that we spoke to fear that automation will eliminate their jobs. So let's talk about that. So this fear of automation, how do we address it? Where are we seeing this automation? And also, it must be critically pointed out that this is a real legitimate fear. But it's also critical to point out that automation can't solve for everybody's entire job, anyone's entire job. Humans are almost always necessary, especially in the SOC. So when we asked our participants, what could they focus on if they employed automation for the most frustrating aspects of their job, and where would they spend their time if they had that time back, here's the kind of the 5 areas that they spoke about. So 45% of people would spend their saved time researching new tools. So they would welcome the opportunity to spend more time investigating the best tools for their teams. 44% of people would develop advanced detection rules. So these rules could then be used to enhance an organization's security posture and frankly improve their key performance metrics like time to detect, time to respond, etc., etc. 38% of respondents said that if they had greater automation, they would spend the time that they saved integrating more systems and more logs. So bringing the sources of logs from more diverse locations, being proactive about getting access to logs that they wouldn't necessarily be reviewing as part of their security posture, etc., etc. 33% said that they would spend more time researching TTPs, collecting threat intelligence, and actioning that threat intelligence as part of their day-to-day procedures. So, they would dig into actors, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And then finally, another 37% or 37% of security teams said that they would spend more time building up-to-date reports, creating dashboards that would do a better job of showing leadership, both security leadership, but also business executive leaderships, the general health of the security posture, what they're working on, and the first order business impacts that they're having by implementing and improving their security operations. Okay, so the key theme that we're seeing here is that security teams are restless. So let's talk a little bit about how we can retain our precious, precious security talent. So lack of time, budget, effective tools are all inhibiting security teams. Overall, this is preventing SOC teams from doing their best work, right? We have a general lack of resources. And so what's preventing security teams from doing their best work is resources. So when we spoke to our respondents and we asked them, hey, what are the resources that you're missing that are driving you to be frustrated and driving you to becoming restless and potentially wanting to switch from your current job? And so when we spoke to these folks, 42% of respondents said that the main resource that they're missing is a lack of time. 39% said it's a lack of budget. Another 39% said it's a lack of effective tooling. And finally, 35% said it's a lack of people, a lack of headcount that they can use. So being aware of that and knowing that that's the type of resources that is driving teams to be, or the type of resource scarcity that's driving teams to become restless. What can we do? What are 3 ways that we can do better to retain our team? And as we spoke to these security analysts and SOC members, 49% that one way that they could retain their team is by compensating them, essentially paying them more. 42% said that providing more modern toolings with advanced capabilities would be a way to retain their team. And 40% said that hiring more people, increasing headcount was another way that that their team could be retained. Easier said than done, right? Okay, so let's talk about some key takeaways. We're presenting this in late October 2023. This is for many security teams planning season. And so we wanted to provide some takeaways that would allow security leaderships both plan for 2024 and begin to calm a restless team. So The top four priorities that we have identified through both the data that we've collected and the conversations that we've had as part of this report, but also through extensive conversations with our customers and with the security community. These are the top four priorities that we have identified for security teams. Number one is to make the most out of the resources that you currently have. So it goes without saying that organizations, both large and small, are facing significant pressures due to a challenging economy. Many teams are adjusting to hiring freezes and reductions in force. So security teams, it's absolutely critical that they make the most out of the resources that they already have. Try and wring more value from the investments that have already been made in the team, the tooling, and also, frankly, the investments in relationships that security teams have established with IT, engineering, etc. The second priority for 2024 then is to tackle burnout at the source. So remember, nearly 2/3, 63% of the survey respondents that we spoke to indicated that they were burnt out. And this is an ongoing problem that, almost inevitably directly leads to employee churn. And so the best way to alleviate burnout is to increase resources. And in increasing resources, kind of SOCs have two options, right? They can either hire more staff or they can adopt better tools and processes. Again, easier said than done, but it's one or the other. You either have to hire more staff and increase headcount, or you have to rationalize the tool spend that you have to reduce the amount of repetitive manual work, the repetitive processes, the error-prone work on security teams today. Third, then, is again to prioritize retention of the team that you have. And we've talked a lot about retention through this presentation. Losing critical staff has massive negative impacts on a security team, on a business, and it's frankly demoralizing for the folks that are left behind. So critically, ensure as a security team you're checking in with your peers, with your colleagues. If you're a security leader, during your one-on-ones, first and foremost, have one-on-ones, but during those one-on-ones, make sure that you're being upfront about how teams are doing. What are they working on? Do they feel overwhelmed? And work hard. Prioritize getting the muck work off the plates of your security team. Allow them to focus on the most meaningful, impactful, engaging work that they have on their plates. Okay. And then finally, identify ways to break down silos within your organizations. So our survey respondents, our customers, consistently point out that communication and data collection is a massive pain point in their day-to-day work. So organizations can make life easier for their SOC and improve the security outcomes in the process by streamlining the workflows between departments. So make it easier for security teams to engage IT. Make it easier for IT to engage security. Make it easier for employees to be onboarded and get access to the tools that they need when they need them. We have seen time and time again how smart, secure workflow automation can really effectively break down silos, simplify communication, and make data access easier for the most critical frontline teams within an organization. Okay, so everything and much, much more that we've spoke about today is included in the full 2023 Voice of the SOC report. This report in its entirety is again ungated and freely available to read and download from the Tynes.com website. If you just go to Tynes.com/SOC, you can access it. At this point, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will happily answer any questions that you might have about the content that we've covered or the more broad themes that we've spoken about over the course of the last few minutes. So, thank you all so much for your time today. All right. So we've had a few questions come in over the last few minutes. So let me just quickly pull these in. So the first question is, how would you expect these numbers to change in the next 1 to 3 years? That's a really good question. So I think if we focus on the headlines of this report, one, that 63% of practitioners are burnt out, two, that 55% are going to move jobs in the next 12 months, and three, that spending time on manual work is the most frustrating part of security analyst jobs. Um, I am perpetually optimistic. So I feel good that these numbers are going to come down. And the reason I think these numbers are going to come down is we're just seeing security teams become more mature, have better processes. The industry is improving. The tooling that is available to security teams to allow them to automate the repetitive parts of their jobs is also improving. And of course, there's just a general shift in industry more broadly than just inside security teams for spotting burnout, for ensuring that teams feel supported if they're burned out or if they're suffering from their mental health. So I do think those numbers are going to come down. How much they come down, I'm not really sure. I think the great unknown at the minute is what impact AI and Gen AI and LLMs would have on these numbers. I'm pretty bullish that they'll have a really positive impact. I think that things like generative AI will reduce the amount of manual work that security teams need to perform. And as a result, it'll allow them to focus on more engaging work. And a result, less burnout and less likelihood to hop around into different jobs. But thank you for that question. Really good one. So the next question we got is, it's a really good one. How does a report like this impact your decisions as a founder in terms of how you manage your teams? So I'm the CEO of Tyne, so I manage a bunch of different teams. We obviously have an extraordinarily mature and extremely competent security team internally. But broadly speaking, I think there's two things that we try and focus on with our managers within the company. One is we ensure that our managers can recognize the early indicators of burnout so that our managers who are having weekly one-on-ones with all their staff are able to say that, hey, this person looks like they're heading for burnout. What can we do in order to reduce the likelihood of that happening, the likelihood of that person leaving the company, and optimize our chances on retaining that top talent within the company? Um, the other thing that we really try and do is ensure that everybody understands the mission that we're working towards in Times. So our mission is to remove the barriers that prevent teams doing their best work. And so we make sure that everybody understands that mission. And when you understand the mission, it's less likely that people are going to get um, uh, unmotivated and that they're not going to, or they're not going to feel likely to disengage with the company, churn, and go somewhere else. But that's another really good question. So the third and final question then is, how do you recommend security teams find new tools to use when they don't have much time to research, trial many tools, and want to find the best tools quickly? Um, Really great question. The first question I would ask back is, do you really need another tool? I think that as an industry, we're really quick to assume that another product, another shiny widget is going to be the silver bullet to all our problems. So I would recommend first and foremost that a team really understands the problem that they're trying to solve. So deeply understand what the challenge is and then understand what the best solution. And maybe the best solution is a new tool, but it could also be something more simply like a simpler process or removing certain controls and checks and balances or red tape in order to solve the particular challenge. Now, if after deeply understanding the problem and interrogating what it is that you're trying to solve, the decision is, hey, that we do need a new tool. I think there are, frankly, better, faster, quicker ways to understand and evaluate if a tool is going to solve your problems than engaging in some long 3 month resource intensive like proof of value. So when I was a security practitioner, and certainly the other security leaders that I admire, the way they do it is they typically talk to peers. So they'll chat to peers who they know within their network have similar challenges and ask them what they did, what tools they looked at, who they evaluated, what solutions they've looked at. And then if they've purchased a product, how are they getting on? Is it delivering value? Are they seeing ROI from the product? Do their teams like it, etc.? And that's a really, really quick and easy way to understand if a product is going to meet your needs. The second thing, which I really recommend, is reading independent reviews of that product from the product or tool or vendor's customers. So there are a bunch of websites like G2 Crowd where you can go and see all the tools in a particular category, whether that's SOAR or SIM or EDR, and see the unvarnished feedback that customers of those products are providing. And you can see some really interesting nuggets of insight coming out of those independent reviews. And then the final thing that I think is a bit of a no-brainer as well is availing of free versions of the product. So if the vendor that you're looking at provides a free version of the product, spin up a community edition version or a freemium version of that product. Quickly understand if it's going to meet the needs that you have. And frankly, if the product you're looking at doesn't have a free version, maybe that's a red flag already. But I think, if you're talking to peers, if you're reading independent reviews, and if you're kicking the tires of the product in your own time, you're going to quickly determine whether or not the tool is going to meet your needs without, again, having to engage a sales team and run through a resource intensive POC. So they're the questions that we received. Before I let you guys go, two massive thank yous. One to everybody who took the time out of the day to attend. We truly hope that the data we've collected, the reports that we've collated, and this webinar has added some value. And finally, a massive, deep, heartfelt thanks to all the Tynes team who worked so hard on creating this report, from interviewing 900 security analysts to collating the raw data, to pulling out the most important insights, to building an incredibly well-designed, informative report. Really, really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to chatting you again soon. Thank you so much.